USA, 1932 to 1972. A man sits at a wooden table in Macon County, Alabama. It is the 1930s. He is a farmer. His hands know cotton and mule leather and the weight of a plow. He cannot read the paper in front of him. A nurse he trusts tells him what it says. It says that when he dies, the government will pay for his burial. $50. Enough for a coffin. Enough that his family will not have to put him in the ground in a borrowed box. For a poor man in the Depression South, that is not a small thing. A decent burial is dignity. It is the last thing you can give the people who loved you. So he makes his mark on the paper. What he does not know, what no one will tell him for 40 years, is what that $50 buys. It buys his body. The burial money comes with a condition written in language he was never shown. When he dies, they will open him up. They will take him apart on a table and study what the disease did to him. The disease he was never told he had. 600 men signed on for free medical care in rural Alabama. This is the story of what was done to them and what was deliberately not done. This is the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. I want to start by clearing away the thing most people think they know. If you have heard of Tuskegee, you have probably heard that the United States government infected black men with syphilis, that doctors gave them the disease and watched them rot. It is the version that gets repeated. It is the version that lives in the back of the national memory like a splinter. And it is not what happened. The men were not infected by anyone. They already had syphilis when the study began. Hundreds of them, living with a disease they did not know the name of, in a county so poor that most of them had never seen a doctor in their lives. I want to be careful here, because the truth is somehow worse than the myth. The government did not give these men a disease. The government found men who already had it, promised to treat them, and then made sure they never were. For 40 years, through the invention of the cure, past the point where one injection would have ended the whole thing. This is not a story about a single moment of cruelty. It is a story about cruelty that had to be maintained, renewed, defended in meetings year after year by educated men who went home to their families afterward and thought of themselves as scientists. The study ran from 1932 to 1972. It outlasted the Depression. It outlasted the Second World War. It outlasted the Nuremberg trials, where American prosecutors stood in a German courtroom and condemned Nazi doctors for experimenting on people who could not say no. It was still running when men walked on the moon. Today, we go to Macon County, Alabama. We meet the men. We meet the people who ran it, the one nurse who stood between them, and the man who finally could not live with the silence. And we sit with a question that does not have a clean answer. How does something like this last for 40 years in plain sight? Let me show you how it started. The Men and the Lie. Macon County, Alabama, 1932. If you want to understand what happened here, you have to understand the ground it happened on. This is the rural South at the bottom of the Depression. The economy is cotton, and the system is sharecropping, which is a polite word for a kind of debt that does not end. A man works land he does not own, hands most of what he grows to the man who owns it, and somehow finishes every year owing more than he started with. The people caught in it are mostly black, mostly poor, past anything most of us have ever seen, and mostly unable to read the contracts that keep them there. Healthcare for these men is close to a rumor. A doctor costs money they do not have. So when word goes around that government doctors are coming to give free blood tests and free treatment, it lands like a small miracle. The flyers said it plainly: free blood test, free treatment. The word treatment is doing a terrible amount of work in that sentence, and we will come back to it. The men who answered had a condition the doctors called bad blood. That phrase, bad blood, is the hinge the entire study turns on. In Macon County, it was a catch-all, It could mean syphilis, it could mean anemia, it could mean tiredness, or any vague sickness a body carried. It meant something was wrong inside you, and these doctors were offering to fix it. What the men were not told is that bad blood, in their case, meant syphilis. I should tell you what that disease does, because the stakes of this whole story live in the answer. Syphilis moves through the body in stages, over years, sometimes decades. It can go quiet for a long time, so quiet a man forgets he is sick. And then, in its late stages, it comes for everything. It eats into the walls of the heart and the great vessels above it. It builds soft, destructive growths in the bone and the organs. It reaches the brain and the spinal cord. And when it does, it can take a man's sight, his balance, his mind, paralysis, dementia, a body and a self coming apart at the same slow speed. Many of these men had late-stage syphilis. The doctors knew. The men did not. That gap, that silence held on purpose, is the foundation everything else is built on. 600 men were enrolled. 399 of them had syphilis. 201 did not, and those men were the control group, there to be compared against. None of them gave anything close to informed consent, because they were never informed of anything true. And there is one more thing about why these particular men were chosen, and it is ugly, and I am going to say it plainly, because the record says it plainly. The study had a hypothesis underneath it, and the hypothesis was racist. The doctors believed that syphilis might be a fundamentally different disease in a black body than in a white one, that it ran a different course, that it spared the brain in black men and went harder at the heart. There was an earlier study out of Oslo, decades old, that had tracked untreated syphilis in white patients, and the Tuskegee men were meant in part to be the black comparison. 600 living people enrolled to test whether their race made them biologically other. One of the era's leading experts on the disease, a man named Joseph Earl Moore, put the assumption into words. Syphilis in the Negro is in many respects almost a different disease from syphilis in the white. It was not. Syphilis is syphilis. The bacterium does not check the color of the person it is killing. But that belief, that these men were biologically separate, is what let respectable doctors look at 600 human beings and see a natural experiment instead of patients. Now, here is where I have to tell you what the treatment actually was. There wasn't any. The men were given placebos, iron tonic, aspirin, things that did nothing for syphilis, handed over with the ceremony of real medicine. They came to their appointments believing they were being healed. They were being cataloged. And some of the procedures were not harmless. To study how far the disease had reached the nervous system, the doctors needed spinal fluid. That means a spinal tap, a long needle into the spine. It is painful. And in that era, done in those conditions, it could leave a man with headaches that lasted days. The men would not have volunteered for a painful test that did nothing for them. So the doctors lied about that too. They sent a letter. I want to read you how they framed it, because the wording tells you everything about the minds behind this. They called it a last chance for special free treatment. Last chance for special free treatment. That is what they named a painful diagnostic procedure that offered the men no benefit at all. Special free treatment. 3 words, each of them a lie, arranged to move a frightened man onto a table. That phrasing did not come from nowhere. It came from a doctor named Raymond Vonderlehr, who ran the study on the ground in its early years and shaped its methods. He understood that the whole thing depended on the men trusting it. And he understood something colder than that. He understood the men's poverty was the lever. There was a report written by the people running this about why the burial money mattered so much. They were honest in their own documents in a way they were never honest with the men. They wrote that without it, getting cooperation would have been impossible. Without this suasion, it would, we believe, have been impossible to secure the cooperation of the group and their families. Read that again in your head. The cooperation of the group and their families. They are describing how they bought access to living men and their bodies after death, and they are crediting the deal to $50 of burial insurance from a fund set up for exactly that purpose. This is the part where I want to slow all the way down, because it is easy to hear words like study and subjects and let them go soft. So let me make it concrete. A man gets a ride in a government car. For someone who has never owned a vehicle, who walks or rides a mule everywhere he goes, a car sent just for him feels like being taken seriously, like mattering. He is driven to a clinic. A nurse he knows by name greets him. A white doctor in a coat examines him with what looks like real attention. He is given a hot meal, which during the Depression is its own kind of medicine. He is given pills. He goes home believing his government cares whether he lives. Every piece of that was staged. The car, the meal, the pills, the attention. It was the set dressing of care, built around a study whose entire purpose was to watch him die untreated and then open his body. One of the doctors wrote a line in their own correspondence about the men they were studying. I am going to read it as it was written, because softening it would be its own kind of lie. It reflects exactly the contempt that made all of this possible. These Negroes are very ignorant and easily influenced by things that would be of minor significance in a more intelligent group. That is the worldview underneath the whole study. Not a scientific hypothesis, a belief that these men were less intelligent, less able to understand, and therefore, in the logic of the men holding the clipboards, available, usable in a way other people would not be. Hold on to that sentence, because the next thing that happened is that the world found a cure for syphilis. And these men, the ones being so carefully observed, were standing closer to that cure than almost anyone. And the men in charge made sure it never reached them. The cure they were denied. Penicillin changes everything. In 1943, penicillin is used to treat and cure syphilis. By the late 1940s, it is the standard. Not experimental, not a gamble. The answer. A course of injections that can stop the disease and, caught in time, send it away for good. For most of the country, this is one of the great medical victories of the century. A disease that had haunted humanity for centuries suddenly has a cure you can carry in a small glass vial. For the men of Macon County, the men already enrolled, already trusting, already coming to their appointments, the cure arriving should have been the end of the story. The doctors who saw them every year had the means to heal them. It was being shipped to clinics across America. They decided not to use it. I need you to understand, this was a decision, not an oversight. You do not forget a cure for the disease you are studying. The whole point of the study was untreated syphilis. Treat the men, and you have no study. The cure was not a relief to these researchers. It was a threat to their data. So they protected the data. This is the moment the study crosses a line that I do not think it ever crosses back over. Up to now, you could maybe tell yourself a story about passive observation. Cruel, dishonest, but passive. After penicillin, there is nothing passive about it. To keep the men untreated in a country where the treatment now existed, the doctors had to act. They had to intervene. They had to keep medicine away from men who were dying for lack of it. And they did. In Macon County, local doctors were given lists of names with instructions. Do not treat these men. The Alabama Health Department got similar guidance. The machine that should have healed these men was quietly told to leave them alone. Then came the war. When the United States entered the Second World War, men were drafted by the hundreds of thousands, and every draftee got a medical exam. Several of the Tuskegee men were called up. The military found their syphilis, as the military found a lot of syphilis, and the military had a policy: treat it. The army was going to cure these men for free, as a matter of routine, whether anyone liked it or not. The researchers stepped in. They contacted the draft board. They got their men excluded from the list of those required to get treatment. The army was prepared to save these men's lives by accident, and the Public Health Service reached in and stopped it. Sit with the shape of that. A government agency whose name is the Public Health Service, working to make sure that several black men did not receive a cure that the government's own army was trying to give them. There were people inside the system who saw it. In 1965, a young Chicago doctor named Irwin Schatz read a paper the researchers had published, an actual published account of what they were doing, and he wrote to them. He told them plainly that he could not understand how physicians could deny proven treatment to sick men. His letter was ignored, filed. One note in the record says it was decided no answer was needed. The study went on. In 1969, with the cure more than 2 decades old, a committee actually sat down to review the whole thing, a real chance to stop. And in that room, at least one member said the obvious thing out loud, that there was a moral obligation to treat these men, to finally give them the medicine. He was overruled. The committee chose to continue. And the record of what they worried about instead is its own small horror. They were not weighing the men's lives so much as the study's exposure. The concern in the room was managing relationships with the local medical society, keeping things smooth, avoiding scrutiny. A man at the table said, "Treat them," and the answer the institution gave was essentially, "Let's not make waves." They did have their reasons. They always do. When the study was finally dragged into the light, the people who had run it offered justifications, and it is worth hearing them because they show you how a thing like this defends itself. Penicillin, some said, was new in the 1940s, and its safety for late-stage syphilis was not fully proven, so denying it was a defensible medical call. Others said that treating a man who had carried the disease for years could trigger a violent reaction in the body and might do more harm than good. There is a thread of real medicine in that second point, but notice what both arguments skip past. The men were never told. They were never offered the choice. You cannot claim you were protecting someone from a risky cure when you never let them know the cure existed or that they were sick at all. In 1973, a federal panel looked back at all of it and was not gentle. They found that the withholding of penicillin had, in their words, amplified the injustice already done to these men. They said the treatment should have been available no later than 1953. They said the violation of basic ethical principles of human dignity and human life overshadowed any scientific argument anyone could make. The defense, weighed by people who came after, did not hold. This is what I mean when I say this study had to be maintained. It was not one bad decision in 1932. It was the same decision, made again and again by new people in new decades, every one of them with the power to end it, and every one of them choosing the data over the men. The historian James Jones gave the study a name that has stuck to it. He called it a death watch. That is what it became. Doctors gathering each year to measure how the disease was progressing toward the only outcome they were waiting for. There is a line in the internal record that captures it with a flatness that is hard to read aloud. "We have no further interest in these patients until they die." Until they die. Not if, until. The death was the data point. The man was the delivery system for an autopsy. And the men did die. Establishing exact numbers is genuinely difficult, and I want to be honest about that, because the truth here does not need inflating. The figures most often cited are these: 28 men dead directly from syphilis, around 100 dead from related complications, 40 wives infected. 19 children born with the disease passed to them before they ever drew breath. Those last two numbers are the ones that take the floor out from under you, because the disease did not stay inside the 600 men. It went home with them, to wives who were never warned, never tested, never offered the cure that sat in clinics down the road, to children who were born already carrying it. The doctors knew syphilis spread this way. They knew the men had wives, and they did nothing, because warning the families was not part of the study. So that is what was done. Now I want to turn and look at the harder questions, the ones about what this was, what it was not, and how to think about the people who carried it out. What it was not and what it was. Let me go back to the myth, because now that you know the facts, it is worth understanding why the false version exists at all. The men were not infected by the government. I said that at the top, and I want to return to it, because the lie and the truth are tangled together in an important way. There was another experiment, at the same time, run by some of the same people. In Guatemala, between 1946 and 1948, American public health doctors did deliberately infect people with syphilis and other diseases. Prisoners, soldiers, psychiatric patients, people who could not refuse. One of the doctors involved in that, a man named John Cutler, also worked on Tuskegee. So the instinct behind the myth is not crazy. The same institution, in the same era, was willing to infect human beings on purpose somewhere else. The United States formally apologized for the Guatemala experiments. That apology came in 2010. Not a typo, 2010. But Tuskegee was a different crime. Not infection, abandonment. And I think it matters that we get it right, because the real horror of Tuskegee is not a needle full of disease. It is a needle full of the cure, sitting in a drawer, kept away from men who trusted the people holding it. Now, the timing. I mentioned Nuremberg at the top, and I want to come back to it because the irony is almost too much to bear. In 1947, the same year penicillin is becoming the standard cure these men were denied, the Nuremberg trials produced the Nuremberg Code, 10 principles for ethical experiments on human beings. The very first principle is voluntary informed consent. It was written, in part, by Americans in judgment of Nazi doctors who had experimented on the helpless. While that code was being written, the Tuskegee study was running. Men with no idea what was being done to them, denied a cure in Alabama. The same country that helped author the rules was breaking them at home and would keep breaking them for 25 more years. The historian Susan Reverby, who has done some of the most careful work on all of this, found that American researchers tended to wave the Nuremberg Code away. The thinking went that it was a code for barbarians, for Nazis, not for respectable doctors in the United States. They could not see themselves in the mirror it held up. I want to spend the last few minutes here on the hardest person in this story, not the hardest to condemn, the hardest to understand. Her name was Eunice Rivers. Nurse Rivers, the men called her. She was a Black public health nurse trained at the Tuskegee Institute, and for the entire 40 years of the study, she was the human face of it, the one constant. Doctors rotated in and out across decades. She stayed. She was the one who knew the men, who drove them to their appointments, who brought the hot meals, gave what small comforts she could, remembered their families, sat with them. The trust that kept these men coming back year after year ran through her. Without Nurse Rivers, there may have been no study at all. And that is the knot. Because everything that made her good at her job, the warmth, the loyalty, the care the men felt from her, was also the thing that held them in place to be harmed. I am not going to hand you a verdict on her, because I do not think the record supports a clean one, and I do not trust anyone who offers one too quickly. She was a Black woman in the Jim Crow South, inside a federal medical hierarchy that gave her almost no power. The doctors decided, she carried it out. After the study was exposed, she defended herself, and I want you to hear how she did it. "I was not the doctor. I was the nurse, and nurses don't prescribe. That was a doctor's responsibility." There is truth in that. She did not have the authority to treat anyone. That power sat with men far above her. And there is also something in it that does not quite close, and she may have known that, because the men trusted her, specifically her, and that trust was used. A play, and later a film, turned her into a kind of tragic central figure, and in doing so got some of the facts wrong and made her carry more of the weight than she alone deserves. The truth is, she was one person with very little power inside a machine built and run by people with a great deal of it. She is the place where this story stops being about villains and starts being about systems, about how many ordinary people a thing like this needs in order to keep going, and how many of them tell themselves they were just doing their small part. The Reckoning. It ended because one man could not carry it anymore. His name was Peter Buxton. He worked for the Public Health Service, investigating venereal disease in San Francisco. And in the mid-1960s, he heard about Tuskegee. He had studied history. He knew about Nuremberg. And what he heard did not sound to him like research. It sounded like the thing his own country had prosecuted other men for. He raised it. In 1966, and again in 1968, he pushed his superiors on the ethics of it. He was told to mind his own work. The study, they assured him, would continue. So he waited, and he kept the file. And eventually, he did the only thing left. He took it to the press. He handed the documents to a reporter at the Associated Press named Jean Heller. Heller was careful. She did not take it on faith. She tracked the study through the researchers' own published papers, the ones they had been printing in medical journals for decades, hiding in plain sight. And on July 25, 1972, her story ran on front pages across the country. She said later that she was stunned, that she could not believe something like this had been allowed to run for 40 years in the United States. And she put her finger on exactly why it had. The targets were poor. They were black. They were in Alabama. And the people who built the study had counted on the idea that men like that would never be in a position to object. The story broke the study within months. By November of 1972, it was over. A lawsuit followed, led by the civil rights attorney Fred Gray, and a settlement, and lifetime medical care for the men who were left and the families they had infected. And out of it came the architecture that is supposed to keep this from happening again: the National Research Act, the review boards that now sit over every study involving human beings, the Belmont Report with its 3 quiet principles: respect for persons, beneficence, justice. The modern idea of informed consent, the thing those men were never given, was built in large part on the grave of what was done to them. In 1997, 65 years after a farmer made his mark on a paper he could not read, a president stood in the White House and said the word out loud. 5 of the survivors were in the room, old men now. Bill Clinton looked at them and spoke for the country. What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. What was done cannot be undone. I keep coming back to the beginning, to the table, the paper, the mark, the $50. A man trying to do one decent thing, to make sure his family would not have to bury him in shame. He thought he was buying dignity in death. He was signing up to be opened on a table, having been denied the cure that would have let him keep living. The men of Tuskegee are sometimes remembered only as victims, and I want to resist that, because they were farmers and husbands and fathers, full people with full lives, who happened to be poor in a place and a time that decided their lives were worth less. Their descendants have spent years insisting on exactly that. They formed a foundation to carry the names forward, to tell the life stories and not just the death counts, that these were men, not data. The study also left something harder to measure: a wound in the trust between Black Americans and the institutions of medicine. For decades, people pointed to Tuskegee as the reason to be wary of a doctor, a needle, a government program that arrived promising help. You can argue about how much of that distrust traces to this one study and how much to a much longer history. But the wariness is real, and it was earned, and it has cost lives in its own quiet way. That is the long tale of 40 years in Alabama. Betrayal does not end when the study ends. It travels down through families and decades, and it does not heal on a schedule. Here is the question I cannot put down. Not how a few cruel people did this. The honest question: how did so many ordinary, educated, professionally respectable people keep it running for 40 years? How many of them went home at night believing they were on the right side of medicine? Because the thing that should frighten us is not that monsters did this. It is that ordinary people did, in an institution built to heal. And almost no one in 40 years stood up and made it stop. One man finally did. It took until 1972. I'm A.M. Blackmere. Thank you for listening.